Hello everyone. Today we are looking at a game played at the 41st Chess Olympiad in Norway, and it is between Teh, Yu Wen Aaron, and Henry Robert Steel with the white pieces. And this was played in 2014, so it's quite an old game. And back then, Aaron would have been a lot younger. He was, I think, 16 during the game, and he was only an FM back then, rated 2,300. And Henry Steele then rated 2,400, so already an IM and already looking pretty dangerous before the match starts. So we're looking at a pretty good game here, and we have Henry with the white pieces. So let's dive into the game. We've got 1 e4, e5, knight f3, knight e6, and a move d4, going for the Scotch game. And now we see e takes d4. And move knight takes d4, and now we kind of need to ask black, okay, what is your plan for the Scotch game? Are you going knight f6? Are you going bishop c4? Are you doing some weird thing with queen f6? So I prefer to play bishop c5, and then after takes you get this move in with tempo because you're threatening mate, so white can't really save the knight and needs to defend the pawn somehow, either with a queen move, let's say queen d2, and now you can just simply recapture the pawn, either d takes or b takes, depending on your style of play. If you want to keep the center and if you want to open this file immediately. So this is what I prefer to do. And okay, Aaron has got a different approach. He goes knight f6 first, which is a bit of a more of a main line, but bishop c5 and knight f6 are very strong competing moves. And knight c3, which moves in the game? Knight c3 is played, and basically we could have seen a variation instead of knight c3, starting with knight c6, b takes c6, e5, queen e7, pinning the pawn, and queen e2, stopping that pin, knight d5, and okay, this is also a way to play the position as white. But we can already kind of see Henry's style. He doesn't want to immediately trade and try and go for the endgame. Instead, he keeps the knights on the board, just defends the e-pawn like this, not trading and then pushing. And so that is met by bishop b4, pinning that knight, preparing to castle. And now the move knight takes c6 needs to be there for tempo. And it's recaptured, and bishop d3 defending the pawn. Also preparing to castle, and we have castles. Also, black could play d5 at the moment, but okay. We've got a certain opening preparation from both sides, and castles. Now the move d5. Okay, d5 on the board, and simply recapture and recaptures. Now, it's in this position that we have to start thinking of ideas as white. You're playing the Scotch, and black is kind of consolidated, but you've got some prospects. You've got this strong bishop. You've got another bishop that could become active, but black is fine. He's got a bit of a messed up pawn structure. You, as white, have better things to hope for. So a lot of players start off the position by going bishop g5 first, pinning the pawn and actually hitting the pawn on d5, you're threatening to double pawns, and then after black recaptures, then you've got a pawn. That's how a lot of players prefer to start, but simply then the move c6 defends the pawn, and you can start playing queen f3 and start mounting pressure here, but the bishop can retreat, can also go to d6, just allow the double of the pawns, and try and hold on to the bishop there if you exchange the bishop for the knight. So quite interestingly, we see a nuance of Henry's prep for the game, the move h3. And h3 stops bishop g4 ideas, which in some lines you probably want to start with queen f3 instead of bishop g5. Because currently, if black decides to take the knight, then the bishop might have a nice way into the position via a3. Let's say, for instance, like this. And let's make a different move, let's say rook b8, then the bishop can enter the position in this way. So this is why he reserves the move bishop g5. It's kind of inviting a trade like that. Okay, but h3 is also made by the move c6. Just defending that pawn, knowing that one day this tempo will come and the knight really needs to guard this pawn. So taking a bit of weight off of the knight's shoulders. Now starting with the move queen f3, still keeping the options open for the bishop. Bishop d6 in the game. Not going for any of that. Maybe getting behind the pawn, preparing to push. Also getting this bishop onto this diagonal. You might have ideas on the square h2 as black. And this type of position you might have even seen in the two knights game. And it's pretty nice, I think, for black. I prefer this to a two knights position for black because you're not a pawn down and you don't have a weird knight on a5. Okay, in the game, the move knight e2, a move I quite like. And the second time I've seen Henry positionally remaneuver his knight from f3 to e2. So this is a thematic thing he does, knight e2. And it responded with in the same way. And this is actually a new move. So after the move knight e2, which has been seen before, rook e8 has been played. But okay, knight d7, a new idea from Aaron, and let's see what it's about. The knight wants to come into c5 and just attack the bishop. Try and trade a knight for a bishop and play with a bishop there in a game that seems to be evolving into the end game. So how's this dealt with? Okay, bishop f4, just developing a piece, allowing bishop takes, move to be played, and in the game queen takes, and then the move knight c5. Kind of trapping this knight and forcing an exchange in a way. And also, if you're trying to be fancy, you could probably see this knight end on e4 someday. So you probably don't want to put the bishop on the f5 square. And okay, so this was the idea. Now Henry could have recaptured with a knight, and the issue with knight recaptures isn't this fork. This isn't that bad. You actually win a pawn in this line because of bishop takes h7 check, king takes, and now you fork. The same knight that has been forking you, you fork him back, and you're up a pawn. That is not the threat of knight takes. Knight takes is probably an alright move, but queen f6 seems to make the move really tricky, because now you are the one that might have double pawns on the f file. If you're trying to get rid of this, getting the queen and knight out of the situation is also going to take some time. So that is avoided. That's why Steel decides to go for this line. And he doesn't move his bishop to f5. He continues remaneuvering this knight. And I can remember the knight was on the square c3. It's just made its way here. Now it's attacking this pawn. It's got prospects of going to f5. And I like this kind of knight maneuver. And it's saying, okay, take my bishop, which he does. Knight takes, c takes. Suddenly you can notice that you probably have another file to play with as well against the pawn that is already attacked once. So how's this dealt with? Okay. The move c5 is recommended by the computer, just to get the pawn on a different square, and maybe try and trade it on this file, and maybe chuck it and try and pick up the b2 pawn later. But that isn't what is tried in the game. In the game, queen b6 is tried, maybe defending the pawn with the bishop, but then you're just making the bishop one big pawn, and you don't really want to do that. In the game, rook f c1, more pressure on this pawn, and you could probably play rook f c1 instead, but that's not played. Rook a c1. The difference being that when the queen takes here, this pawn is still defended. But Henry's got a different idea. He doesn't really care about these pawns in the game, so he goes rook a c1, and the queen takes the pawn. Now knight takes e6 is playable, and your knight gets to e7, and it looks pretty fun for white. And Henry goes to something else. He goes for rook takes c6, and it's basically sacking another pawn, but saying that, okay, well, I'm getting into the 7th rank with my rook, and I quite like my knight where I've remaneuvered it too, because defending the f7 square is going to be very tricky for you if you're trying to move your bishop to defend it, because my knight's currently guarding that square. I can simply capture it and then start putting some pressure onto the g7 square, which is which is going to have to be defended for the rest of the game in very annoying fashion. And the queen remaneuvers and definitely picking up more pawns. So this is the idea of going rook c7, some more pressure here, but it doesn't need to be defended immediately. Yet again, because there are only two attackers currently. And okay, so he doesn't want to go for this a2 pawn. Instead he goes for a3, queen a3. But now we start realizing Henry's plan, starting with rook e1, just bringing another rook to that file. And currently, okay, what can you do? He's sacking this pawn as well now, and there is a line where that starts with queen takes d3. That is better for white after rook e7, even though you're sacking the pawn on a2 as well, h2. And now you can simply play this rook here, and it should be game over soon. Bishop here is just met by takes, so you can't capture that pawn on a2 after rook c7. You need to try something like h6 and in a timely manner bring your queen back to g6 to defend the pawn. So, okay, he doesn't want to go for this pawn. Instead, he tries the move bishop d7. And we have the move rook c7 entering on the 7th rank. And it's quite nice to note that in this position, this knight is way more worth than this bishop. And the bishop doesn't really have a nice square to go to. And I think because of this bishop, the rooks aren't connected, so they can't oppose these rooks from getting to the 7th. So he got a bit frustrated and he played the move bishop d7, deciding that after rook c7 that his bishop will be defended by one of the rooks and this pawn by the queen. So you've got a rook defending this bishop, babysitting the bishop, and a queen babysitting the pawn. And you can already feel that this is not really what your pieces are supposed to be doing. They're not supposed to be babysitters of pieces that are of lesser value. At least for black, he's got defense of the e7 square and stopping this rook from getting onto the 7th for the time being. So the queen's not just the babysitter of a pawn, it's babysitting on e7 as well. But none of the white pieces are babysitting anything. They're just going forwards and attacking. And this is why I like this game. Rook e3, swinging over to the king side. You can't get into e7 immediately. And now black should have probably just played a5 and just kept on guarding the e7 pawn and said, okay, well, white is slowly but surely improving his position. But for the time being, I can just wait around, let's say with king h8, and after more attacking moves, after I don't need to defend this threat anymore, I should be making a threat on the queen side myself, so that one day when we do trade into the endgame, this could be better for me. And this line isn't necessarily applicable in this situation. It's applicable to a few moves ago when black should have decided to, in this case, to go queen takes a2. This should have been the long-term plan of Aaron, because he should have realized that by this time the rooks would be invading the 7th. In the game he went queen a3, and the difference is that this pawn remains in the game. So now if we say let's get the rooks into the 7th, black should simply start by rolling. We can start by bringing the queen back into the game, queen a6, attacking a pawn, getting back to the king side. And now, if white continues his plan from getting to the 7th, simply a queen trade, offering a queen trade, and after both rooks to the 7th, now you play a5, making something of your position on the other side of the board, just accepting the fact that this is your only compensation and trying something. And okay, rook a7 is a strong move, and I actually want you guys to see how the computer decides to play this as white. This was very instructive. So, okay, taking the rook and this pawn falls, and white's definitely still got the better position. So he doesn't want to just take the rook and give the pawn back immediately. He defends the pawn bishop a6 and connects the rooks. And we're just looking at a computer line now. So, and now the move rook takes s7. After both rooks are connected, you can see this move works. Because now if the move Rook takes, okay, you can first start with bishop takes, but now after taking one of the rooks, the other rook can be captured. And starting with this rook would be bad because simply I'm getting into this file. Capturing here is also bad because of the fork. So quite instructive. So first get the bishop out and get your pawn back, but now simply rook takes f8 check, and you can't go king takes because of rook takes, so you need to go rook takes. And now white's definitely playing a better game, but black can hope for a lot. These pawns are dispersed and they're not helping each other, but better than what happened in the game with both rooks entering the 7th with no compensation on the queen side. So we get back into what happened in the game, and we reach this position that we were looking at after queen takes a2, played a bit later on, but now we've already seen. Sorry, we reached this position, and I was showing lines with rook g3 and an attack starting on the king side. And it was in this position that Aaron makes the idea, or has the idea to start something on the queen side. And it's just too late by now. We have rook e7 in the game. The queen gave up the square. And he thought maybe bishop e8 was good enough defense in this position. But now white's just got this very comfortable position. The queens are still on the board, not with that other line where you trade queens and you try something with a pawn on the queen side. Now white just improves the position. King h2, taking your time. You're just going into queen comes over, but now the tricky move. Knight e6. Beautiful move. The knight can't be taken with the f pawn because of mate in 2. King moves. Take. Mate in 3. Maybe there's a quicker way with the queen as well. And so that it can't be captured like that. And this poses a big threat. Your one rook is actually just hanging. In some situations, queen g5 could also be a threat, not even picking up this rook. But okay, you only have one thing to do now, and that's queen takes e6. And from this moment on, black is playing down the exchange, rook and bishop for a queen. And maybe he thought he had something with his pass pawn. But okay, immediately you need to deal with this threat, mate in 1 threat, so it's done. But the pass pawn is no more. So let's just see how Henry decides or converts this position, which is in his favor, in a very simple, straightforward manner. Bishop f7, and we realize white's advantage really lies in the fact that he can just slowly improve. Look at this, black needs to guard this pawn the whole time because of the coordination of the queen and rook. And these pieces, they're not really doing anything, they're just waiting around and defending. And white just makes his king and pawns active. First he switches direction a bit, and then switches his rook and queen around, keeping pressure on g7. The pawns are not progressing, you're not playing with any pawn breaks soon. Rook needs to babysit, and h5, taking some squares away from the bishop. And okay, you only have 2 real squares, so it goes back, trying remaneuvering, and now the king goes forward again. You've got all the time in the world as white. You just keep the pressure there and slowly push these pawns up. He decides to capture now, and now the reason he decided to capture is because he took away enough squares of the bishop for some tactics to be working. For instance, bishop c2 doesn't work because of this fork, and bishop b1 seems to be quite tricky as well because of potential forks. So you really only have 2 squares. He decides for bishop h7. Bishop h7 definitely a bit stronger. Going for one of the forward squares could potentially walk into a pawn march on this side and your bishop not getting back into the game. So the idea of g4, just to pick up that pawn. And now he might think he has a fortress, but there's not really a fortress. The king and the pawns maneuver slowly, they just walk up, and there's really no stopping this. He tries some rook moves, but now we see the king is just stuck, and they're definitely back rank ideas. The bishop is null and void, so you only have a rook to play with versus queen and king. Check, the bishop goes back, and now finally, after this move, rook c6. The bishop and the rook aren't stopping f5 from happening anymore. That was maybe a last hope for Aaron to coordinate somehow, but it shouldn't be too tricky to get the move f5 in. So, okay, so the rook moves, and then king just moves away, and now f5. And the idea is that after the king reaches this position, he doesn't even need his queen anymore. He has completely smothered the black king by just slowly advancing forward with the initiative he already had. Something like rook e1 check, it's played in the game, but he decides not to pick up the queen. So you realize how beautiful this is. It's black to move, he needs to make a move. Any one of the moves gives up the bishop, walks into a lost king and pawn endgame. And so he continues, and just simple defending moves, and now the move f6, the big threat of the position, why f5 was so good, and some rook checks. But the king just walks its way over to the rook, and black resigns. There's nothing to do about the g7 threat anymore, and the f7 threat. How the game could have maybe ended, something like this, g takes f6, trying to attack that queen. Queen takes f6, and then you need to self-pin, rook g7. And now I can win in a very, very sneaky way. Walk the king over, because the bishop has no squares, and the rook can't move. So the bishop just needs to stay home. And anything else with the bishop, anything else loses the bishop immediately. But white can just simply pick up the pawn. He doesn't need to pick up the bishop even. He picks up the pawn. And okay, moving the king closer would walk into a mate in one. So you really need to keep the bishop alive on the square. And now white can just simply run the pawn up the board. Same situation here. You can't capture this pawn because simply king takes. And now you're in Zugzwang. You need to move your king, and that's still mate in one. So we see the game ending in a simple manner where the bishop goes to h7 and this pawn just walks up and becomes a rook or a knight or whatever you want to end the game with. Anything should work. Bishop goes back. Now simply this is forced. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this game. It was a good Scotch game, and it was quite nice to see that the initiative of using the 7th rank, exploring some ideas for black to defend when white attacks 7th rank. For instance, trading down queens and trying to make a passed pawn. And then it was also interesting to see in the end, after the queen was won, how the game was won simply by simple improvements, keeping pressure on the 7th, just pushing those pawns up. And then your pawns are so strong, you probably don't even need the queen versus the bishop, and that was specifically in this situation by this move. And using your king and pawns then as your other pieces. Very instructional game. I hope you enjoyed. Please check out the other South African players' games, and let me know in the comments section if there are any players that you want me to analyze as well. Thank you.